his own coat of arms, Gerald.
It's live now.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. In case members of the public were wondering, we were just having a chit-chat about some fairly random things. So, very welcome to everyone this afternoon. My name is Ben Dowling. I'm the chair of this employment committee. As always, this is being broadcast to press and public to view online, should they wish to. And we're meeting virtually for the fairly obvious reason of the COVID-19 pandemic. Although I personally hope that we can somehow continue some element of online meetings post the pandemic, perhaps a discussion for another time. I've got a bit of script here because last time I got told off for not saying the right words. The City Council has advised that pursuant to Section 78 of the Coronavirus Act 2020, this meeting will be run by reference to the model standing orders as set out in the Local Authorities (Coronavirus Flexibility of Local Authority Meetings Regulations 2020 number 392. Please could people follow normal etiquette and turn microphones off if you're not talking and on if you are talking, unless of course you're talking to someone not on the meeting, in which case we don't need to hear it. Could we do some quick introductions? I already mentioned my name is Ben Dowling. I'm a Lib Dem councillor elected to represent Milton Ward and chair of this committee. I'll go in councillor alphabetical order. So I've got Councillor Corkery next.
Councillor Cal Corkery, representing Charles Dickens Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Donna Jones, Vice Chair of the committee, Conservative Group Leader representing Hilsey Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Sanders.
Hello, I'm Darren Sanders. I'm the Cabinet Member for Housing and Preventing Homelessness. I represent Baffins, North Milton and South Copner, and I'm one of the Liberal Democrat representatives.
And Councillor Vernon Jackson.
Hi, I'm Joe Jackson. I'm one of the councillors.
Thank you, everyone. Wonderful. We'll now go through the officers present, as well as anyone else who might be giving a deputation. I believe Councillor Udy has decided to join us as well. So we'll just go in alphabetical order again. Peter Bolf.
Peter Bolf, City Solicitor. Thank you, Chair.
Natasha.
Natasha Edmonds, Director of Corporate Services.
Rochelle.
Rochelle Neller, Human Resources.
Richard.
Richard Locke, I'm the Council's Acting Procurement Manager.
Anna.
Anna Martin, Democratic Services.
Thank you. Sue.
Sue Page, representing Finance.
Sean.
Hi, Sean Tetley, Payroll and Pension Manager.
Thank you. Councillor Udy.
Hi, I'm Councillor Udy for Charles Dickens Ward. I'm here to watch. I was contemplating giving a deputation, but I feel like my points might be raised by other members. Also, I asked to be on this committee, but the leader said no, because I have too many responsible things to do.
Thank you, Councillor Udy. If you do decide you would like to have input, I think we tend to take quite a flexible approach to this committee, so feel free to just make yourself aware to me throughout the meeting, and I'm sure members will not make too much of a fuss to hear your contribution. And finally, David.
Hello, David Williams, Chief Executive.
Thank you, everyone. Much appreciated. So, turning to the agenda, we've got apologies for absence. I'm aware Councillor Atkins isn't with us at this moment. I don't know if Councillor Jones, if you've heard from him or not.
I've messaged him. I think he might be teaching, so I am just waiting for. As soon as I get an update, I will let you know.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Jones. Anna, have you heard from Councillor Atkins ahead of the meeting?
I haven't heard anything, no.
Okay. I know Councillor Atkins is generally very good at attendance, and so we'll assume he's coming at some point, but I'm sure Councillor Jones will update us if she does hear, and I'll do the same. Thank you, everyone. Any declarations of interest? No. Okay. I do have a quick question, which I probably should have checked out with the City Solicitor before this meeting. I am a director of a company which is in itself a living wage employer, accredited as such. Does that have any impact? I don't think it does, but just checking.
No, I'm taking the view it probably doesn't. You've raised the issue. I don't think it precludes you from participation today, Councillor Doe.
wonderful, because although that would have given me some time back in the day, I'm looking forward to today's meeting. So I'm glad I can stay. Thank you, Peter. Minutes of the last meeting held on the 24th of November. These have been circulated. Do I have anyone who's happy to propose them as accurate and correct? Thank you, Councillor Sanders. Anyone who wants to second them? Thank you, Councillor Vernon Jackson. For those who are listening but not watching, though, indications were made by putting their hands up. Unless there are any issues from anyone, we'll just take those as read and accept them. Silence. Okay, wonderful. I wonder if the fourth item on this agenda will take as long as the first three. Living wage. I believe, Natasha, you're going to kind of present this along with some help from others, and then we'll dive into some conversation and see where we get to. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of the report before you today is following on from the September meeting where you asked a working group to be established to do further work on the financial implications of becoming or seeking accreditation to become a living wage employer. So the report today covers the impact of the living wage increase to £9.50 from April next year, and seeking the Employment Committee's views on applying that increase for PCC staff from next April. And then it also goes into the financial impact of accreditation, and sets out the financial impact as well as some of the challenges and risks and how we might address some of those in moving forward. So what I'd like to do is ask my colleagues, Sue from Finance, Richard from Procurement, and Peter from Legal, first to set out the financial impact, then the procurement implications, and then Peter finally some of the risks and challenges. So Sue, if I could ask you to provide a summary on the financial impact, please.
Okay, thank you. So the report is showing we've presented two tables there. The report is showing the impact on our own staff of the living wage uplift. And then we are also showing in the separate table the impact on the contractors. We set out the methodology we used to calculate the impact on contractors in paragraph 3. So if you want any elaboration on that, we can do that. Ideally, we would have preferred to have a better response from the survey we conducted with the contractors, but in lieu of that, we did have consultations with experienced contract managers in the relevant fields. We'd also focused our attention on the areas with high impact, i.e. those contracts with a high people content. And you can see that we're showing in that second table, the impact of the contractor uplift on general fund services over the 3-year period is £3.2 million. That's saying that by year 3, if we renewed all those contracts, that would be the ongoing cost. And within that, again, it's important to note that 2.6 million of that is related to care services, which will be the areas with more people focused. So then in the it's also important to see that we are saying that if we move this forward, we will need a project manager to facilitate this, at least for the first year. The Director of Finance has added his comments at the end and setting out the Council's current financial position and budget pressures and challenges faced by us, and the need to identify funding if you decide to go ahead with this proposal. That was all I was going to say. I don't know if you have any further, if you want procurement to elaborate on the methodology at all.
Thank you, Sue. I think it might be helpful if we go through it and then leave questions to the end. Richard, can I ask you to set out some of the procurement issues?
Yes, of course, no problem. I do want to draw attention, first of all, to an unfortunate sentence that was taken out in the final edit. So in the first procurement concern, It talks about non-compatibility with EU law. Obviously, we've exited the EU, but in exiting the EU, a lot of our procurement legislation has remained mostly the same. It will be radically changed over the next 2 to 3 years as that goes through consultation. So there will still be some procurement considerations that we'll need to go through, but it will be on a domestic basis rather than an EU basis, which I'm sure Peter will be able to elaborate on a bit further. I think in terms of implementing into procurement, for us to implement into our procurement governance, implement into our procurement documentation, the best way of doing that would be to make it a true pass-fail requirement. I can see that there's other approaches that have been made that sometimes say, well, we ask for 2 tenders and we always pick the living wage one, which to me just doesn't sound correct. If you go for living wage accreditation, I think it should really be clear and fair and equitable across suppliers, and also fair in terms of what the expectation is when they come to tender. But I think in terms of building that into our documentation, doing the training, and then building it into contract terms and monitoring those contracts to make sure that it actually happens, that in itself will take a level of resource more at the back end, to be honest, to make sure it is properly built in and evidence. And I've seen that some other authorities have almost had like a whistleblowing type policy where if an employee is not being paid the living wage and feels that they should be, they've got a means of coming to the authority, but we'd have to investigate that further. So the front end aspect of it in terms of building into tenders wouldn't necessarily be that difficult to do. It would require training and implementation. The back end in terms of making sure it actually happens and monitoring and being able to hand on heart say that is properly fully implemented across our supply chain and checked will take a level of resources as it goes on the report later to say. Where it will become a bit more difficult, I think, is in respect of mandating that, and if a supplier has difficulties in implementing that across their organisation. Where it could become a bit difficult could be, say, in care, where we've got a social care supplier who provides not just for us but also for Hampshire and West Sussex, and has agreed pay rates for members of the staff at certain levels. If we mandate living wage and we end up with an employee who's ducking in and out across multiple contracts, because the definition is 2 hours a week for 8 consecutive weeks, which is different to the TUPE definitions in terms of someone being assigned onto a particular contract, that could make it a bit difficult in terms of tendering, could make it a bit difficult in terms of them being able to put in bids without having a complication on their own kind of HR and union aspects. But Rochelle and Natasha would be much better qualified to cover those aspects than me. So it could cause some problems in terms of a bit of narrowing. Where it's been implemented that I've seen in the living wage literature is where you've had more partnership between authorities that neighbour each other. So I know in a lot of work I've been doing at the moment is around social value, and if you look to the northwest, a lot of authorities have come together to have set policies there, and that would make it simpler. But looking where we are with our neighbouring authorities, I think we would be a bit of an island. So we would have more difficulties there than if we were surrounded with other authorities that were seeking to do this. When you look at the other aspects, so that would be coming into new projects and retenders, and the requirement would be that as soon as we get to living wage accreditation, is that all new tenders, all new projects would have to have that as a requirement. That would have to be turned on, as far as I'm aware, looking at the literature. The next aspect in terms of when we get to extension options, so typically our contracts would be on something like a 3-year base term, and then usually there's an extra 2 years at the end that we could then take up or not. And the living wage would require us, as we get to those breakpoints, to build living wage into all those contracts. It would be difficult for us to then work with that supplier to get them to absorb all of that increase without potentially having an impact into the resourcing. So that could be people's jobs, there could be less. or convert, or the other way around is in terms of an impact into a budget. There might also be some issues in terms of mandating that requirement onto them, and we'd need to look at what the contract terms are, because it would also require a variation onto that contract. So there could be some difficulties there as well. The other aspect would be around longer term contracts. So we have some big strategic contracts that have base terms in excess of 10 years. And the living wage, whilst there's certainly discretion that is alluded to within the literature, it does also say that from getting your accreditation, there's an expectation that with all best endeavours, we should be fully implemented within 3 years. And it says that in relation to longer term contracts, there's an expectation to make all best endeavours to get living wage implemented into those contracts whilst they're kind of midpoint, which again will require a level of negotiation, agreement to vary those terms, and we might have some difficulties in terms of enforcing that into contracts. But again, I'll probably look to Peter to elaborate on some of those points. A lot of this will be felt into care, into adult social care, children's really. There might be some aspects into HRA in respect of some of the sheltered housing and other sorts of care that's provided into HRA. Probably not so much into some of our term maintenance contractors, because a lot of the trades will be on significantly above national living wage. Apprenticeships aren't covered, but it could impact into some levels of back office. But it's fair to say there is further work to do with HRA to understand that we focus most of our attention into the care contracts and speaking to the contract managers. So building on what Sue said, we wrote out to all of the high impact suppliers. So we've got a supply base roughly of around about 600 odd. From that, we consolidated down into 200 to make sure that we could then focus our attention there and make sure we can adequately answer questions. So that had pretty much all of our care contracts. I think the only ones that we didn't go to directly was anyone that was less than 50k, because they wouldn't have such a financial impact. We could probably rely upon a model. We wrote out repeatedly, but unfortunately we didn't get the response rate that we would be hoping for. I think a difficulty there is that you don't want to threaten any kind of sanction for non-return on that type of thing, and there's nothing that we would never want to do that. And we also couldn't be disingenuous in terms of presenting a kind of carrot, for want of a better term, there as well. But unfortunately, we didn't quite get the level of response that we would hope for. So we ran on the basis more in terms of using those responses to feed into a overall analysis that I worked up with Sue, working with contract managers in the council, primarily in care. So speaking to colleagues that have worked in contract management in care for decades, and I know Sue has done a similar thing with finance colleagues as well to feed into that analysis. In terms of the other parts of the report that talk about procurement, as I say, in terms of the contract management side, we'll have to consider what we do to enforce this into contracts, and if a supplier is found not to be enforced and delivering the contract when they should be, we'd have to consider what the appropriate sanction would be. I don't think an appropriate sanction would be to go to a termination on that contract when it's bearing in mind if it's a care contract, what it's there to actually deliver. But we'd need to consider what different types of sanctions could be brought in, and that would have to be built into contract terms and agreed with suppliers. On a resourcing side, as Sue said, we will need, I think, a level of project management support. And within my team, we have a vacant position that is budgeted for, which is for contract management coordination. So if we were to push this forward, we'd need to get recruiting into that role very quickly in order to build up a program that would have to agree with living wage, that they'll then hold us to in respect of milestones to show that we're then implementing into all of our contracts at the anniversary dates that have been agreed. I'm aware that there is a level of discretion, but it does say in the literature that we should be aiming for a 3-year period, which I understand might be different to some conversations that have gone on with living wage in respect to timescales. So I think that's everything from a procurement basis. If I could hand across to Peter now, if that's okay, please.
Yes, thank you, Richard. That was a very good yomp through basically the legal position from a sort of procurement aspect. What I think I've got to say first is this: there's nothing inherently illegal about you as a membership signing up to a living wage. The difficulties you're going to have are per existing contracts, in the sense of rationalisation of those terms and conditions, i.e., will the contractor agree to implement a living wage, yes or no? Answer, probably not. The second problem is future contracts, future tendering, in the sense of A, getting people to tender with an artificially high wage, potentially compared with their own staff costs and other contractor costs. So you create a different pool of selection. That will narrow your tendering process and by definition lead to potentially a non-alignment with best value, because you're going to create a smaller market of people wanting to contract with us because you're implementing a living wage as a primary contractual demand. That's quite a difficult construct, and you start dealing with the sort of macro and microeconomics of their relationship, which is quite difficult. From a legal perspective, nothing to stop you doing it, but from a wider construct of challenge, there are problems with that, in the sense of other contractors or other people not being able to contract with local authority businesses who may or may not say, we're local businesses, we can't compete because we can't pay a living wage because the wage base here is less, for example. So you could get, on the back of a procurement challenge, some form of challenge based upon reasonableness of how an authority behaves in terms of how it sets out its tenders and what demands it puts in. Now, assuming you can do it, harking back to what Richard says, one of your other additional problems will be how you enforce it over a term of a contract to deliver a primary service, for example, education or care for the elderly or children or whatever. The minute you start getting into a contractual variation, you get into an argument about vitiation and termination of contract, which is actually quite difficult because you still got to deliver the service. So there is an ongoing problem there in an extension sense after 3 years of the primary terms of your contract for the last 2, for example, or indeed getting people to behave and or monitor it and or police it. So far as additional risk is concerned, you may have salary creep between people who are above a living wage as opposed to those under living wage, in the sense that the bandings become narrower, so that will give us some difficulties there. And additionally, you're going to have problems about shared contracts across services, for example, Hampshire and Portsmouth, as alluded to by Richard. Yeah. So far as equal pay claims are concerned, I'm less concerned about that because you're actually trying to do a good thing, which is increase the living wage of people that are on lower paid jobs by definition. So whilst claims for equal pay will subsist, I can see them going down in a narrowing sense. But that's a minor risk compared with what the proposal is. So it's basically, contracts variation as is, i.e. can we vary our contracts as you can, subject to agreement, and or future contracting. How do you contract with people and enforce a living wage when an employer may be paying his or her staff less or different terms and conditions? Because that of itself is very difficult to enforce, and it's not illegal of itself. It's just very difficult in a parole contract way. Why would I align to a primary contract to affect my own employment base? Why would I? Right, sorry to be so gloomy about it, but there was a quick trot through the basic premises of how contractual alignment works. Any questions?
Okay, thank you everyone for that interesting approach and introduction to the topic. Before we get going, Councillor Atkins, I believe, has joined us. Are you there, Councillor Atkins? And if yes, could you just say whether or not you have any declarations of interest?
Yes, I'm here. No, I don't have any declarations of interest. Thank you, Chair.
Wonderful. Thank you, Councillor. Okay, so I think we're moving on to comments and questions. So either wave physically or use the hands up function and we will come to people. And I will start with the leader as he is so eager.
Thanks. Meeting we had from the lady from Living Wage Foundation was very useful. And clearly they've done this with lots of different places, particularly places that have large numbers of contract social services. Oh, there's a thing in the chat saying there was a deputation, Ben, that might need reading.
Yes, good point. There is a deputation. Peter, it's been circulated to everyone. Does it need to be read out for the public, or can it just be...
I prefer it to be read.
Okay, wonderful. In which case, I shall read it.
Okay.
He says, I just had it up and I've lost it now. One moment. Okay. So deputation from John Woods, Portsmouth City Unison branch chair. And I'll just read it as is. Unison urges members of the Employment Committee to endorse recommendation 1 in the report. That being at full council as part of the annual budget and council tax setting meeting, including the identification of a further £3.2 million of general fund budget savings covering the period 21-22 to 23-24, and B, that the Cabinet Member for Housing as part of the HRA budget and rent setting meeting, including the identification of a further £0.9 million of HRA budget savings covering the period 21-22 to 23-24, noting that originally such matters will be discussed through consultation with the housing tenants representatives. Mr. Woods goes on to say, the council has spent long enough debating and investigating the implications of accreditation with the Living Wage Foundation and needs to show bold leadership and decisiveness. It is not simply acceptable for workers in schools or in contracted services to be paid less than the real living wage. Low pay and associated poverty has a massive impact on the health, well-being and life chances of the workers concerned and their families. The social costs are immense. The economic benefit of paying the real living wage to all workers in schools and contracted services is also massive. The positive knock-on effect in terms of increased spending in the local economy and reduction in in-work benefit payments would be huge. Living wage accreditation would be a real achievement Portsmouth City Council, its employees and the city's population could rightly be very proud of. It would send a message that the council is serious about tackling poverty and exploitation. The report identifies a range of difficulties which may arise in terms of contracts and procurement if the payment of real living wage is enforced. While living wage accreditation should not be delayed, Unison would strongly recommend the council consider bringing contracts in-house as a solution to many of these difficulties. Bringing services back in-house would also allow any profits to be reinvested by the council instead of going to company directors and shareholders. Anna Borden's Guardian article of 29th of May 2019 highlights how councils have done this, and then there's a link to that article which has been circulated to all members. The council, the Association for Public Service Excellence, has produced a guide to councils insourcing. Again, a link to that guide has been provided in the deputation. This guide highlights that councils are bringing services back in-house for practical reasons and to achieve best value rather than for ideological reasons. The report before Employment Committee identifies approximately £2 million additional costs to adult social care associated with the real living wage being implemented across residential and domiciliary care. For these workers putting their lives on the line day after day in the COVID-19 crisis to often be paid significantly less than the real living wage is nothing short of scandalous. The COVID pandemic has prompted the council to think radically about what will be the new normal, and many of us welcome increasing recognition that we cannot simply go back to old ways of working. Years of privatisations and cuts have devastated health and social care, education, public health and other services. This has seriously impaired how those services have been able to respond to the pandemic. It is essential we seize the opportunity to relook at how services can be better delivered by publicly owned, democratically accountable provision where decent wages are the norm. For example, integration between health and social care is often seen as something to aim for, but in the past has integrating private and voluntary domiciliary, residential and supported living services under the council umbrella has rarely been considered. Think of all the advantages in terms of efficiency, economies of scale, coordination and planning a fully integrated and publicly owned health and social care system could deliver. We are unfortunately in an age of what we are likely to see further deadly pandemics, and we need all our public services to be fit for purpose. In the fifth richest country in the world, where those at the top of the society have their wealth have seen their wealth increase, money can be found to ensure no worker is paid poverty wages. The council must seek living wage accreditation now, but also urgently look at insourcing our public services. That's from John Woods, Portsmouth City Unison branch chair. And thank you to Anna for reminding me that we had that deputation. I appreciate that. Okay, back to the leader.
Okay, thanks. So we had a very useful meeting with a lady from Living Wage Foundation who talked us through how we get accreditation, and that was really useful. And so what she said we have to do is to set up a group to work with them, which we've done, and they're working away. What we don't need to do is to do everything in one fell swoop or whatever. So we don't need to find all the money immediately. You can just do things as contracts come up and gradually renew them. And I think she talked about the length of time as being up to 10 years in some places, as the contracts were that long. So it seems very sensible that we've taken the in-principle decision that we think this is the right thing to do, and that we then keep working with them so that we get the accreditation soon, as part of a plan for when contracts come up, to say that we would expect contractors to pay the real living wage as part of any contracts, any bids they put into Portsmouth City Council. So I think that's option 3 on the paper. Ben, you're more quiet than normal.
Okay, thank you, leader. I believe we have Councillor Corkery now.
And queries about the report. Clearly, we haven't had a great deal of time to kind of look at all the details and make inquiries outside of this meeting, so I haven't had the opportunity to do that. So I will take a bit of time during this committee to try and get to understand some of the detail a little bit better, if I may. So to begin with, in terms of the costings, clearly that's a major feature of the report. A very large figure, significant figure, have been produced with regards to the cost to the local authority of ensuring that all outsourced staff are paid a living wage. Let's remember, a living wage has been calculated just to give people a basic, decent standard of living, and anything less than that, clearly they'd fail to be able to provide for them and their families. So this figure that's been produced, I understand it's not been based on ideal data due to a low response rate from the contractors. I'm just trying to get a better understanding. I know there's been some discussion of how it's been produced. I wonder, firstly, whether there's been any discussion with other local authorities who have implemented a living wage with regards to the costs they faced. And I think, a particular example that springs to mind that I was reading about recently was Salford, who brought in the real living wage for all their outsourced carers, 3,000 carers. I think it's a slightly larger local authority, and that's costing them £1 million a year. So clearly our costs are quite a lot more for presumably less carers. So I just wondered, whether we'd talk to other local authorities about the costs they faced.
Sue, do you want to answer that, or do you want me to, or Natasha?
Whoever between you feel.
I can add, in terms of the care aspect, our social care finance team had independently calculated what they thought the impact was, and it's of the same order that we're talking about there, the over 2 million on the social on care sector. So that was a separate, done in a completely different way. So it sort of it informs it, doesn't it? It gives it some bit, it makes it more real.
Okay, thank you, Sue. Richard, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think what I just want to say is that the figures that we have in our report cover all of the care services rather than one particular aspect. So it's all of the residential care, it's all of the domiciliary care. So it's every type of social care contracting activity. We've had limited discussions with other authorities, but we have obviously spoken to living wage representatives, and there is, in the toolkit that Living Wage produced, there is a lot of very, very useful detailed case study examples that talk around whole sections around implementing in social care contracts. And when we compare the figures that we have here compared to some other sort of comparable authorities, they're in the same type of order. The figure that is in the report as well, just to stress, is our best estimate. When we had the report, the figures that did come back from the contractors in the survey, some of the information was good and sound. Some of the information indicated that maybe they hadn't fully understood it. And an example of that is where we actually had the survey repeated twice by the same organisation on 2 occasions that actually had different numbers and different results. So to come with a very, very, very exact number is almost an impossible task in some ways, because the value of our contracts can sometimes be dictated by the demand that goes through the contracts, so that can be variable. But when we look at the figures that we have here compared to other authorities that have implemented living wage, and we consider the size of our authority and our type of spend, and that we don't have lots and lots of insourcing of these services as well, it gives a level of comfort that those figures are roughly where they would need to be. I think taking on board Councillor Vernon Jackson's point as well, the figures do go over a 3-year implementation, and the figures that are in the report cover a straight line implementation. If we proceed and we work closely with Living Wage, and we then start to produce our milestones, so we look at all of our contracts and get all of our extension option dates, re-tendering dates and so forth in there, it will produce a bit more of a staggered graph, but we're confident that if you go over the base of those 3 years, it will still add up roughly to about the same amount there, but you might have some significant variances between different parts of years.
Okay, thank you, Richard and Sue. Councillor Corkery will let you continue.
Thank you. In terms of, again, the methodology that's been used, has it been assumed that contractors will pass on pound for pound the exact cost they face as a result of paying people a living wage to the council?
Sue, do you want to answer that one, or do you want me to answer that? Yeah. Apologies. Yes, but based upon where we are with our contractors in care, we often go through negotiations with them year on year, and any increases that go on with statutory national living wage, there is then a pass through of cost, and there's then a level of negotiation. And speaking to our contract managers and finance managers in care that go through this year on year, the expectation would be that where those contracts are already under pressure, as you would expect, there's very limited amount of room for manoeuvre for the contractors to absorb those costs. So at the moment, that is based upon, I think, largely 100% pass through. But Sue might be able to elaborate further.
No, that's exactly right, because we have assumed that that's what the contractors will do, so we didn't have any other information to assume otherwise.
Okay, thank you both. Councillor?
Okay, that's fair enough. I mean, that's an assumption that's clearly been made within the model that's then produced this figure. I'm not entirely sure. I think I'd want to have more of an understanding about how realistic an assumption that is. Clearly, not all businesses do respond to increasing costs by passing on 100% of those increased costs to the customer. there's kind of other factors at play, but I appreciate we perhaps don't know any more about that today. Do we know if any adult social care providers that are currently contracted by the council already pay the living wage foundation rate?
Perhaps
anyone?
I can come in here. No, we don't know, and we did ask that question in the survey, but if those employers, those contractors don't choose not to share that information with us, they're under no obligation to tell us that information, although we did ask. So we don't know what those actual pay rates are within the sector.
But if I could come in on that as well, and in speaking to the contract managers in social care and children's care, every time we re-tender services, more often than not, there's a duty obligation. At that point is when we see the pay that the most of our providers that we contract with are paying their staff, and obviously when we go out and we tender services as well, we also see the pay rates that come in because we request that more often than not on an open book basis. And from the conversations that I've had with the contract managers is that it is predominantly to a great extent that the carers are being paid on the national living wage rather than on foundation living wage rates currently. And they weren't able to provide any examples where we did have suppliers that were paying up to foundation living wage. There is a variance, and some do pay more than others. But yeah, there was a very strong indication from them that the majority will be paying on national living wage.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Corkery.
Okay, thank you. I think that's quite a shocking revelation within itself, isn't it? The majority of people in Portsmouth working as carers, looking after some of the most vulnerable people in our city, are just on the minimum wage, and I think emphasises the reason why this is so important, why it's so important that we drive up standards and wages within that sector. Just coming a more general point, actually no, before we get onto the general point, the integrated impact assessment that has been provided, clearly there's not a massive amount of information within that. Is that complete and is it accurate to the best of our knowledge?
Natasha?
Yeah, it's as complete as we can make it at this point in time. So part of the impact assessment is I would call a living document. So as you know, if the decision is to progress to accreditation, then that's a document that would be updated as we go along, as we get more information on the impact of this.
I mean, the reason I ask is that I don't know how many questions there are on there. There's quite a few, isn't there? At least 10. Only one of them seems to have been answered, and actually that answer seems to relate to something different, which is the paying of living wage to PCC staff.
Yeah, as I say, it's a living document, and it will be updated to reflect the changing and increasing level of information that's available. Otherwise, we'll be working on assumptions that might not be correct.
Okay. I mean, I guess, yeah, that's it's a little bugbear of mine, I think, with these impact assessments more generally, is that I don't think sometimes they are completed properly. And I think that's more a general point, I guess, for us to take away and ensure that if we're going to have them and if we're going to use them, and I know part of it is a legal requirement, part of it is extra bits we put in, but if we're, as an authority, going to use them, then I think we need to kind of use them properly. In terms of the report as a whole, clearly there's a lot of discussion about the costs and the risks associated with becoming a foundation living wage employer. There doesn't seem to be much, if any, discussion of the advantages or the benefits. So I just wondered, have those kind of considerations been looked at?
Natasha?
Yes, of course, and you'll be aware that we already pay our own PCC staff the real living wage rate, and that is proving to be a considerable benefit to the organisation. But I think that this will be the going for accreditation or not is a policy decision that needs to sit in the member space. If members take the decision to go for accreditation, then clearly all of those benefits will be part of that implementation programme in terms of how we recruit and how we market ourselves as an employer more widely within our organisation and our supply chain.
Okay. Thank you, Natasha. Councillor Corkery?
Yeah, I mean, just to come back on that briefly, I mean, as an example, I would imagine there are potential benefits to adult social care as a directorate of having carers working for them and looking after vulnerable people that are kind of paid more and potentially are more inclined then to invest in their own kind of training or education or stay within the sector for a longer period of time and become more experienced. So, I mean, my suggestion would be that there could well be improvements in terms of service and delivery quality and then potential kind of financial savings as well. So I think these are all things that we need to consider as a whole when we consider these decisions. It's not just about looking at how much is it going to cost the local authority. Actually, there's very likely to be benefits to us as an authority, but also significant wider benefits to the community and the local economy. And I think it's important that we bear that in mind when we're kind of making these decisions. I think that's all the questions I've got for the moment, Charles. I have got some general concluding comments to make, but I'm happy to let other people ask their questions first, if you like, and then come back to those kind of concluding comments at the end.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Yes, I think if we try to do questions of clarification and understanding first, and then we can do another round of to do comments more generally. Councillor Jones.
Thank you very much, Chair. My question relates to the finances, but before I go on to that, can I just quickly follow up on a comment from Councillor Corkery's questions, because it's relevant, and perhaps for yourself and Councillor Corkery, who haven't been on Employment Committee for a length of time. Certainly Councillor Bennett-Jackson and I have, and this has been going on now for 3-4+ years about, you know, living wage, national living wage accreditation, national living wage foundation, the government's living wage, been having conversations. And I think Councillor Corker raises a good point around the benefits rather than focusing on all the kind of, you know, the risks and what appears to be slightly more negative. And we actually have had lots of conversations in the past around why we'd want to do it, so to aid retention of staff and recruitment of staff and things like that. So that has been discussed previously, albeit it was some time ago. So, you know, I think it's right to raise it again, but certainly it has been discussed in the past before we then moved on to this piece of work that we're now obviously focusing on, which is the accreditation itself. My question, I know basically Councillor Bennett-Jackson's recommendation and a proposal, I suppose, around recommendation 3, which is obviously to, for those watching maybe online as well, to instruct officers to work with the Living Wage Foundation to speak to and attain living wage accreditation through the development of an implementation plan over a suitable period of time that's consistent with the Council's overall financial constraints, which are COVID, not challenges, and any such plan be approved by full council with any financial impact commencing 2021-22. Well, of course, that budget, the council's budget, is due to be brought to full council in literally a matter of weeks and due to be published, I think, next week or the week after, for scrutiny management to consider it on the 29th of January before the full budget meeting some few weeks later. So if we go with 3, I wonder if Sue Page can just us some comments. I mean, I note in the financial section at the end of the report, it says that there has been no allowance made in the 2021-22 budget for any of the increased costs around accreditation membership of the living wage. So therefore, does this mean that the administration are going to have to find additional costs between now and the publication of the budget next week and it going to full council in February? It might be, it's quite low. I mean, I know the schools figure and the PCC staff figure direct is about 45k. But so if we are going to consider 3 properly, I think we need to know what's going to happen with that budget gap that I believe exists between now and the February decision meeting. And then obviously Councillor Bennett Jackson alluded to the fact that it doesn't have to be done all in one go. You can stage contracts and you can, roll these in. I did have concerns around the Equalities Act, particularly around the equal pay claim, but I noticed that Peter Balfour has put a comment in the report saying that he believes that's quite low risk. So fair enough, no problem, and I'm pleased that was covered in the report. But in terms of the finances, we need to know, if we're signing up to this today with recommendation 3, what the impact is on the budget, which we are right on top of now, and what cost those are going to be. It's all a bit vague if we just vote for number 3, and we don't actually know what of the costs that are in the crib sheet we've got in the report will be started in the next financial year, and certainly how are they going to be paid for, because at the moment, according to our finance director, no provision has been made.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Jones. I think that's primarily a question for Sue, but I have some thoughts that might be helpful as well. But I'll go to Sue first in case she says what I.
I'm happy to answer the question about the budget, if that's helpful, Chair.
Leader.
Well, just to say, I'm sorry, I've knackered my back, so I'm having to lie down. So I've got a trapped nerve, which is very unpleasant. So there isn't, Donna is right, there isn't provision in the budget to be able to find the 3.2 million, which is why we want to do it on a gradual basis. And what I'm looking for is an in-principle decision here, and then to work through in exactly the same way as we work through all the other different pressures that come in year. So this year we had to accommodate a larger amount of pay for the pay rise than was budgeted for. In the budget bill, there was money for a 2% pay rise, and the actual amount was 2.75 million. So that was an extra 600,000 that we had to find for the council's base budget. We found that within the existing resources available to departments, so there was no need to come back to council to look at that. So my expectation is that when we do sign up with them and make a decision that we will get accreditation for being a Living Wage Foundation employer, that we will be looking at this on an annual basis, and that most of the stuff will just be absorbed in the inflation increases that go to departments. There will have to be inevitably more being directed to adult social care, because that's where the biggest pressure will be. But I don't see there is a need for us to be able to put particular money in at the moment into the budget until we know the detail.
Ben, can I come back on that, following on from my question, if you don't mind? Thank you. It's actually against the council standing orders for us to pass a resolution of something without it having, particularly if we're knowing in advance that there is going to be a cost, for us not to have identified how that we paid for. Hence why we go to finance and ask them for a comment. Hence why our finance director has quite rightly put in the report that there is no accommodation for even a partial implementation of cost for 3.2. Could go up to 5.5, by the way, as well. We don't know. It's a sliding scale up and down. So for us to be asked to make a decision on this today, in accordance with our standing orders and with the comment in there from our finance director, who notes that there are significant pressures on the council's budgets at the moment. I mean, he doesn't say because of COVID, but we know from our separate briefings with him that that's why. That I think it would actually be against the constitution of the council for us to pass this today without understanding and identifying where those monies are coming from. I think, if the leader of the council's recommendation is an in-principle decision today, fair enough. But I think that this needs to be reviewed again, with it being highlighted for employment committee members how it's going to be paid for. To say we had an increase in cost to our staffing budget, 600,000 mid-year last year that wasn't accounted for, but we swallowed it up. That's why you have reserves. That's why we do have provision for additional costs in year. You don't start your year taking on additional costs that you can't even accommodate because you know you're going to get more throughout the year. It's very bad accounting practice. It's not the way that we do things at the council, and I am seriously concerned about the fact that we are setting a precedent here of adopting an idea of adopting something we want to do, and we've got a comment from the finance director saying that he has made no provision for it, and he goes on to say, should the council wish to implement this, we need to make a provision for it in the budget, not just follow it up somewhere in year. That's really bad precedent in terms of governance of the council, and it's certainly not something that sits very comfortably with me. So I'd like to refer that both to the solicitor and to Sue Page as finance director on the meeting today about how that sits in accordance with our financial and legal standing orders and policies.
Okay, so I think I've got an answer, but we'll go to Peter Bolf as our monitoring officer to respond in regards to standing orders and process, and we can take it from there. Peter?
Chair, I think Peter's had to
gone?
go. Yeah.
Do we have a legal person on call? And if not, can the Chief Executive weigh in, please?
Chairman, yeah, I'm just having a look at that recommendation, and the recommendation 3 is couched quite carefully, I think, in terms of the development of an implementation plan over a suitable period that is consistent with the council's overall financial constraints. I suspect, although I don't know, but somebody might be able to advise me, that phraseology was in there in part for the Director of Finance's satisfaction, such that we always would have that proviso that it needed to be within an envelope that the council could properly accommodate within whatever approved budgetary position it had adopted at full council.
Thank you, David. I mean, just to add to that, my understanding of the council budget approval process is that that which full council is legally responsible for and that approves in this case the February meeting is around the total figure of the council and the cash limits per portfolio. And by utilising the wording in this recommendation, it's saying that essentially any impact that happens in that initial period of time would be taken within the boundaries of those cash limits as set by full council, and therefore we're able to move forward. But ultimately the full implementation of this actually will not be an employment committee decision, it will be a cabinet and full council decision. So there is no decision today to burden the council with additional financial constraints. It's about moving this forward in such a way that we don't do that, but that we still have the objective of achieving accreditation. So that's my understanding. I can see Councillor Atkins is keen to come in. Councillor, is this on this topic? Because I'm just conscious Councillor Jones never got the chance to kind of continue her questioning. Oh, nodding. Okay, Councillor Atkins.
Yeah, and it's on this topic because I mean it's kind of how does recommendation 1 interact with recommendation 3? Because my reading of the report was in the 2021/22 budget that will be decided in February, effectively the table in paragraph 6 would be applied, and there would be £1 million of savings. So is it like £1.4 million of savings found in the budget starting in February? Is that not the case? Because that's how the implication I thought of recommendation 1A, which says full council as part of the annual budget and council tax setting meeting, including the identification of a further 3.2 million general fund budget savings covering the period 21-22 to 23-24, and then you've got the table in paragraph 6, which says finding 1.4 million pounds worth of savings in 20. I took that to be in 21-22. Is that not the case? Will those savings not be found in the budget starting in February? The other thing is I took slight issue with recommendation 1, saying that it was 3.2 million across the period. It was actually about 8.4 million across the period, cumulative. It's 3.2 budget savings from the revenue budget in the final year, isn't it? So it's 1.4 in the first year, 2.2 or so in the second, and then 3.24 in the third year. So it looked to me like the report did have actual budget implications. Is what you're saying is that effectively it doesn't, and this is just a sort of indicative outline.
I think in essence, yes, but perhaps if I can give some further clarity on my understanding, if officers want to weigh in further, then I'm sure they will do. My understanding between recommendation 1 and recommendation 3 is that recommendation 1 is the idea that today the Employment Committee recommends to full council that the immediate wholesale implementation of the living wage as soon as possible, and we make immediate provision for that, whereas recommendation 3 is saying that the council, as a basic stance, is steadfast in its commitment to achieving accreditation through the Living Wage Foundation. However, in order to do that, we want to develop a considered plan that takes the financial constraints of the council over a long, well, potentially longer, but an adequate period of time going forward, therefore understanding the constraints of both this year's budget and budget years to follow. So that's my understanding, but I don't know if David or Natasha want to tell me one of us is wrong, or indeed both of us.
Well, Chairman, my reading of it aligns with yours, and I think that's why there is an explicit reference there to the mutual exclusivity between recommendations 1 and 3.
And that's correct. Okay. Your interpretation is correct.
Wonderful. Thank you both. I think that kind of clarifies that element of it. Councillor Jones, this was the start of your kind of questioning, so I'll go back to you.
I'm done. It was just a financial clarification. That's all. I raise it because I think that's the case, but I'm satisfied with the, what the chief executive has said in terms of, it can be incorporated within, as long as Sue Page, David Williams, and the finance director are happy with that. Then there you go.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. In which case, we'll go to Councillor Sanders.
Thank you, Councillor Dowling. I have no questions, only comments, if that's all right, Ben.
In which case, I'll ask for comments at this point, and can we do raised hands based on that basis? I know Councillor Corkery already made that clear earlier, so we'll go to Councillor Corkery.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to start by thanking John Woods for the deputation and all the important work he and other council trade union reps do in standing up for local people and fighting for better paying conditions. Carers and other low-paid outsourced council staff have been at the forefront of dealing with the pandemic, caring for the vulnerable and keeping us all safe, often putting themselves at risk in the process. I believe we owe them not just a debt of gratitude, but a responsibility to do all within our power to ensure they get paid fairly and treated with respect. I think that's an opportunity that we've got before us today to really take meaningful, radical action to ensure that all people working in council services, and let's remind ourselves that's what these are, these people working in social care, they may work for some private company who pays them minimum wage, doesn't give them proper sick pay, makes it difficult for them to take holiday. They may work for that private company directly, but they're working in an outsourced council service, and we have a real responsibility to ensure that they're treated fairly. And I think today we've got the opportunity to do that with option 1 in the recommendations, which effectively means giving them a living wage as soon as possible. Not 3 years down the line, not 10 years down the line, but as soon as possible, because that is what we owe these people. And this is just the basic, I mean, this isn't luxury we're giving them. This is the basic wage required to live a decent, basic existence for them and their family. And like I say, we've got the option to do that today with option 1 in the recommendations, and that's what I will be supporting, and I would encourage committee members to do so as well.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Corkery. Leader.
Thank you, Ben. I'd like to propose option 3, or sort of recommendation 3, I think we need to make sure that we are going down the lines of making sure that we become an accredited living wage employer. But it's just not financially realistic to be able to do it all in one go, and therefore we need to be able to build to that. Therefore, I'm happy to propose that we go, that we do endorse it, but that we endorse it on the basis that when contracts come up, we have found the additional money, so that we go for recommendation 3.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Vernon Jackson. I have made note that Councillor Vernon Jackson made his recommendation earlier, so we'll vote on his first, and then we can come to others depending on outcome of each vote. Councillor Jones. I don't know if it's just me, but I can't hear Councillor Jones.
Sorry, I took my raise hand down and not my mute button. I was getting confused. Okay. Sorry. So in terms of out of the 3 choices, I certainly think that number 3 is probably the more sensible of the 3, bearing in mind the limited information that the majority of us making a decision today on this committee have. And certainly I appreciate the aspirations and intentions Councillor Corkery has just stated, which I think are commendable. Why should staff that work directly in care, looking after people in the city that work for City Council, be paid £9.50, £9.75 or more an hour, but those that are caring for people in our city through our procured contracts through a private company be paid potentially £8 an hour? I mean, that does seem greatly unfair to me. So I think there's some good points raised there. My conundrum with this today is that until I have my full budget briefing with the finance director, I don't know at the moment, bearing in mind the council's budget for next year hasn't come out, whether or not we are looking at £1 or £2 million of not too painful savings, and in which case accommodating these additional costs is going to be quite, it'll be easier next year, in the next financial year, or if we're looking at 2 or 3 times that amount, and also that is including making some quite difficult decisions to cut services elsewhere to save money, because I haven't had that budget presentation yet. I haven't seen the figures. So I feel almost like I'm walking into a dark room blindfolded and I don't know what's in front of me at the moment. So I appreciate the merits of Councillor Corkery with the recommendation 1, and I also can see the merits of recommendation 3 that Councillor Vernon Jackson is making. But at this point today, I feel slightly hamstrung in terms of being able to make my decision, because I will not make a irresponsible financial decision on behalf of the people of Portsmouth, and I simply do not know the scale of what is coming in February, or in fact to be published at the end of this month. So regrettably, I don't feel like I'm in a position to be able to support 1, 3 or anything at the moment, because I feel like I don't have the adequate information.
Councillor Jones. Councillor Sanders.
Thank you, Ben. I would recommend that we go with options 2 and option 3. I want to come back to option 1 in a second, but I would say that at the last council meeting we agreed, all of us, to £12 million. Significant financial uncertainty around COVID. And it's pretty clear that this is going to last a very, very long time, and no one knows the impact it will have on the authority. Personally, I would love to implement the living wage now. I've asked people within the housing department to look at doing it as quickly as possible, and I did that long before the pandemic occurred. And as a result of that, I simply do not recognise the £900,000 savings target in 1B. That bears no relationship to the figures that I have been given, and given that 1B is asking for my approval to save £900,000 of that, I'm in no position to give it if you ask it. I think a further £900,000 worth of savings on the housing revenue account will mean less repairs. It will mean less things will get done. it will mean less opportunity for ordinary working people to get the basic things that they need done, because that will come out of rents. Most of the budget comes out of rents. About 80% of the total that is alleged in this budget in 1B for the housing revenue account comes out of 3 contractors. And at the moment, as I said, those are figures I do not recognise, and I will not, if you ask me, approve £900,000 worth of savings, because they bear no relationship to what I will do, and I'm not prepared to put ordinary working people through that. So I would suggest that we do not agree with what Councillor Corkery has said on that basis alone. However, the important thing is to make sure that we can pay people decently. I'm happy, and option 3 does that, to work with officers to see how far we can do that. I think the leader is absolutely right that we have to do this on a contract by contract basis as it comes up. It sounds like the Living Wage Foundation is happy with option 3. I'm happy with option 3 because it means I can work with housing officers to try and see if we can bring it in, and therefore I would support what the leader has said and oppose what Councillor Corkery has said, because it means less repairs and less things get done for ordinary working people, and I don't want that. Thank you, Ben.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Sanders. I will take that as a formal seconding of Councillor Vernon Jackson's recommendation and proposal. Councillor Atkins.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I want to thank Councillor Sanders for his speech, because I think he injected, possibly, I'm not sure how deliberately, an element of realism into the discussion by recognising that any money, when the council is going to have to make cuts to fund this increase in wage for care sector workers or contractors in general with the council, then it's not going to add any extra money to the local economy, because the council is cutting other services to pay for this. And not only are they cutting other services, it's likely raising council tax to pay for this. And it's likely, Keir Starmer has been out in the media opposing what is likely to be a 5% rise in council tax in the next budget. And it's quite possible that the leader in the cabinet may take the decision to ask for that, because they will ask for the 3% adult social care to cover a large budget deficit in that area already. So I do think it needs to be recognised and injected into this debate that any money that we spend on this proposal is going to be withdrawn from other areas of services of the council or the pockets of council taxpayers. And so it's not adding anything to the local economy. Now, there is an argument, I do recognise that argument, that social care workers are not paid as well as they should be, and the ones working through contractors are not paid as well as those working directly through the council. But private care contractors they look after elderly and vulnerable people who are paying for their own care, might have to sell their houses, using their pensions, consuming savings that they have. And that's why it ends up not being a very well paid profession, in part because the money simply isn't there to pay very high wages in the care sector. And if we start imposing that for some contracts of a private care organisation and not others, a small care organisation is going to have a great difficulty working out, which its contracts is paying staff our wage for, which is paying government wages for, and that kind of bureaucratic complexity is the type of thing that, as the legal officer suggested, can lead to exclusion of local or smaller care providers from being able to easily bid for our city council contracts. So I do just feel that at the moment, in the current context, there is a level of irresponsibility here. Either we are chucking a huge sum of money at it up front, which is the honest approach, and accepting that is how much it will cost, accepting we are pulling money from other areas of council services, other areas of the local economy to pay for this, or we are essentially kicking it into the long grass with option 3 by saying we'll do it in some unknown future date. And we've already had one of the portfolio holders saying he's not prepared to accept the level of cuts that the report suggests his portfolio will need to accept. So the realistic approach seems to be here that neither option 1 nor option 3 is currently actually viable, and there are very few people on this council apparently willing to accept that. But that is my reading of the report and the debate that there has been here today, and I think that is unfortunate. And of course, it'd be lovely to pay everybody as much as we possibly could, but if the money isn't there, the money isn't there. And given we don't know how much of a cut is going to be made to the council budget, how much of an increase is going to be put on council tax, I don't feel I can vote for any of the proposals in this report either. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Atkins. Just to pick up on that last piece, I think in regards to item recommendation 3, which the leader has put forward, I don't think it is a kicking it into the long grass option, because it's already committing us to starting this financial year, just that it will be within the constraints set out in the budget, and that it is only saying that the implementation might take longer. It's not saying that the implementation won't start immediately. So I think that's the slight nuance needed to understand the position. I've been relatively quiet myself over the duration of this meeting, but I just have a couple of pieces to say. And actually, I want to pick up on something that was in John Wood's deputation, and Councillor Corkery did mention briefly, which is this idea of community leadership and where we stand. We know that Portsmouth is a low-paying economy. We know that the care sector is particularly guilty of that. We also know that we are one of the largest organisations to kind of participate in that sector, and therefore the organisation that has the most clout and ability to potentially move us forward in terms of raising wages across the board in the city, particularly in health and social care. And so this isn't as simple as just saying that people at Portsmouth City Council and those who provide services to Portsmouth City Council should be paying the living wage, although that is ultimately the goal in terms of the accreditation. This is a much bigger stance around equal pay, fair pay, and the council taking a leadership role in the city to say, this is what we believe, this is what we want to encourage businesses to do, this is what we want to encourage other public sector bodies to do. It's working with partners. At the moment, a couple of people mentioned earlier that we are an island in the sense, well, both the literal answer that we are an island, but also the idea that we're an island in relation to the living wage. And that may be true because we're surrounded by water and the county council, which is currently not a living wage foundation employer and doesn't currently, or at least not publicly, have that aspiration. But that doesn't mean to say that that might not change in the future. We also know that the county council isn't our only immediate neighbour. We have other unitary authorities in our very close proximity, as well as lower tier authorities as well. So whilst it may take a long time to get to the position where the wider Hampshire and the Isle of Wight geography believes and follows the living wage ethos, I believe it's something that can be achieved in time. But someone has to start somewhere, and I believe that someone is us at Portsmouth City Council. So I will vote and endorse the leader's recommendation, following recommendation proposal, which is recommendation 3 as written in the paperwork, and we'll take a vote on that. Just a question of process for Anna. We've had a recommendation from the leader. So do we take a series of votes based on who votes for options 1, 2 or 3, or do we take a single vote on the leader's recommendation because it came first, followed by a single vote on Councillor Corkery's recommendation? Can I just clarify?
Councillor Downing, sorry, can I just clarify? So I think Councillor Sanders, if he could clarify, I thought he put forward recommendations 2 and 3.
Which is right, and that's what we should do. And I presumed everybody would support recommendation 2, is what we currently do. So my presumption is we do 2 and 3. Or
yes,
my proposal is we do 2 and 3.
Yeah, thank you for the clarification. I think in my mind, in order to achieve 3, we have to do 2, and therefore I didn't think about it in those terms. But yes, I think everyone's clear that on that. Anna, can you come back on my question?
Ben, I'm so sorry. Can I put forward an alternative recommendation? I'm sorry.
You can do, absolutely.
2, because I don't disagree with 3, but I've obviously said I want to vote for 2. I'm not going to vote against that for sure. But if 2 and 3 are taken together, I think it might be easier if we vote on 1, 2 and 3 separately. Makes sense?
So I'm happy with that, as long as Anna says that's okay to do.
Right, well, I've got some advice from Vicky here, and she says the recommendations are mutually exclusive, so the committee needs to be clear as to exactly which alternative to accept.
Okay, so it's
Chair.
Okay.
My understanding was that I don't think Councillor Corkery's proposal was seconded. So if we're going to go through them, we should probably go through them on the basis of option 3 was proposed and seconded. Option 2 has been proposed and seconded, but option 1 hasn't been. But if option 3 falls, then maybe option 2 will get seconded. But currently there is a proposer for option 1, but no seconder.
I think we're starting to get quite caught up in a process debate, which will end with the same outcome no matter how we do it. But just for the sake of clarification and doing it right, David or someone else, given that Councillor Corkery's proposal isn't seconded, should we still vote on it or not?
Well, you shouldn't be voting on a proposal that's not seconded. So I think that's quite clear. I think Donna, as I understand it, is proposing 2, but not 2 and 3. Is my understanding? Is that correct?
Well, my request is that Darren's proposal makes sense to include 2, but can we just so I think you're right, David. Yeah, can we separate them? Can we vote on 2 and then vote on 3, as opposed to voting on 2 and 3 together?
Okay,
yeah, but the leader and Darren's proposition, as I understand it, is to vote on 2 and 3 together. If they're happy to take that separate, then I think, Chair, you have a clear run at it.
Okay, leader, are you happy to separate your 2 proposals?
Yes, I think that's all right.
Okay, wonderful. So,
sorry, I did put my hand up. I've got an alternative suggestion. Given these options have been put to us in the paper as potential recommendations, I do think it's worthwhile having the individual votes, and then obviously option 1 or 3, whichever of those then attracts the highest number of votes will be the one that is passed. And I would just request, I guess, someone to lend me a seconder so that we can have that vote.
I think it's very clear that in order to vote on something, there needs to be a proposer and a seconder, and I think the Chief Executive's made that advice clear, and I'm going to stand by that. So if there is a seconder for Councillor Corkery, they need to make themselves vocal now. Okay, wonderful. In which case, apologies, Councillor Corkery. I think your views have been made clear. If it makes you feel any better, and will be minuted, and people can watch the committee back to me so that they know exactly where you stand on this.
Chair, I'll second Councillor Corkery's recommendation just so he can put his vote on record.
Wonderful. I'm sure someone somewhere in the wonderful world of social media will write about this later.
I think it's unlikely.
It won't be me.
It won't be interesting.
Okay. The leader's recommendations did come first, so we'll still vote on those first. So we'll vote on recommendation 2, which is that the council continues to pay all council employees the living wage as defined by the Living Wage Foundation. Could we have all those in favour of that recommendation no, because we're doing this on Teams, so actually I need to go through and check everyone is happy. Is there any dissent to item 2, to proposal 2? Proposal 1, recommendation 2. No. Okay, wonderful. Everyone agrees that we should pay council employees the living wage as defined by the Living Wage Foundation. Wonderful. Thank you. That takes us to the second proposal from the leader and Councillor Sanders, which is recommendation 3 on the paperwork. I think we're going to have to take this one by one in order to get a clear vote. So, in no particular order, Councillor Sanders.
4.
Councillor Corkery.
4.
Councillor Vernon Jackson.
4.
Councillor Jones.
Abstain.
Councillor Atkins.
Against.
And I will vote for. So I make that 4 votes for, 1 abstention, 1 vote against, and that's therefore carried. Thank you, everyone. I believe that then makes the final proposal fall because it's mutually exclusive to the one we've just voted on. So after all that,
might get more votes for.
But they're mutually exclusive. So if we pass something that mutually excludes something else, we can't then vote in favour of something else because we've just
Yeah, but
excluded
his
it.
might get more votes than yours, so his becomes the mutually exclusive one that gets picked. That's the point he's making.
But we've just passed a resolution that excludes option 1.
Yeah, but he's got a point in what he's saying.
Yeah, absolutely. But the process says something that's mutually exclusive. We have voted on it, and therefore that is now where we are. But I'm
going to have to disagree with the leader because on balance, I think Councillor Corkery does have a point. So we will take the vote.
Yeah.
So this is proposal 3 from Councillor Corkery and apparently Councillor Atkins, which is
it'll be good to see this in budget amendments coming forward.
Yeah. Well, I expect so. £4.1 million worth of additional savings brackets cuts to the council's budget. Just to clarify, that's proposed by Councillor Corkery and seconded by Councillor Matthew Atkins.
And will appear in both budget amendments.
So could I get a for, against or abstention, starting with Councillor Sanders?
Well, they're going to provide £900,000 of cuts in a week, I tell you. Against.
Councillor Corkery?
For.
Councillor Vernon Jackson?
Against.
Councillor Jones?
Against.
Councillor Atkins?
Against.
And I will vote against. So,
but Matthew, you've got to put this in your budget amendment now. You seconded it.
Okay, so I think we're very clear on the outcome of that vote and all previous votes. So we're moving forward with recommendations 2 and 3 as written on the paperwork. That brings us to the end of our agenda and the end of our meeting. Thank you.
Well, it says second, Ben, wasn't there something we had to do about members' allowances?
No, Peter's gone off to do something about members' allowances.
Okay, sorry. All right, my apology.
Okay. In which case, have a wonderful afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
We'll stop the live stream. You'll still be audible for a couple of minutes.
Okay.